Welcome to the Sprint Revolution School. This is the culmination of my life's work. Everything I've learned coaching some of the world's elite athletes, including Cesar Cielo, Fred Busquet, Bruno Fratis, and leading my Auburn team to the NCAA Championship in 2009 alongside the legend Richard Quick. Now all of that knowledge is available to you. Our program is structured into easy-to-follow, interactive modules designed to take you from where you are today to becoming the fastest swimmer you've ever been. Check out the link in the description or simply search The Sprint Revolution on school.com to get started. All right, today's guest, Benn Harradine. How you doing, mate?
Mate, I am feeling pretty good. I've been at a wedding in Toscana, in Italy, got the last days of summer, but I can't complain. I'm doing all right. Thanks. How about yourself?
I'm good, loving life. I'm in Irvine, California. Where you at?
I am in Dalarna, Sweden at the moment, getting a little bit cold over here. So yeah,
Darwin, is that what it's called?
yeah. I live just outside, about an hour and a half, hour and 50 minutes outside of Stockholm North. So
Wow,
the
awesome.
colder areas of the north.
Well, mate, we're going to have an interesting chat today. What is a discus thrower doing on a swimming podcast? What are we doing here, mate?
Well, discus thrower is what I used to be, I suppose.
Yeah.
And a big part of my identity as an athlete. But since then, I've moved on down the exercise physiology, coaching space, high performance space, and been working over here in Sweden in those areas. But I am married to a swimmer. Jenny Johansson is my wife, Swedish breaststroker,
Awesome.
world champion 2015, and always kept a bit of a, I suppose, finger on the pulse with swimming because it's such a huge sport in Australia and a little bit lesser known over here in Sweden, but been a big interest of mine throughout my whole career as an athlete, but now more so as a professional.
Interesting you say a little bit less known with Sarah Sostrom and people like that, who've just the greatest ever, So is it really still not huge on the list of sports in Sweden?
I mean, she is a massive name, of course, like
Yeah.
and a good friend of ours. But I would say, in terms of sport, in its size, it's still
Mm.
long behind things like football and ice hockey and these sorts of events. And similarly, or quite dissimilar from what we're used to in Australia, like people learn to swim breaststroke first over here in Sweden. They don't
Mm.
learn freestyle like we do from a very young age because they don't. Well, I suppose they have the bodies of water, but there's not the beaches that we're used to, and freestyle is kind of like a prerequisite for survival. But over here,
Yeah.
most people start with breaststroke, and not until they're a little bit older. So it's
Wow.
for that reason, I don't think it has the kind of popularity that we're used to at home.
Yeah. Well, tell us about Herradine Performance, mate. I mean, you went to 3 Olympics yourself as a discus thrower. Where did school and learning and those sorts of things kind of intersect with your professional sports at the time?
Hmm. Good question. I suppose, like, I didn't really know what I wanted to do when I started studying, and initially I was going to work in PE or as a PE teacher. But then the more and more I got into sport, the more and more I became interested in how small adjustments can have such huge impact.
Mm,
And I suppose for me, like being the learner that I feel as though I have been my whole career,
mm,
trying to find opportunities to learn as we do, and surround myself in good people, good mentors, has been
mm.
a huge, I suppose, extension of my degree. With that exercise physiology under the belt, it's a nice title to have, but I feel like I probably learnt that my most valuable lessons from traveling and speaking to coaches in different
Yeah.
environments and being in and around warm-up tracks and warm-up pools. And that's where you really get to the nitty-gritties of
Mm.
what's going on and how to do it right, and just spitballing ideas with peers and colleagues.
Mate, I couldn't agree more. I traveled the world from 2000 to 2006 with the Aussie team. I went to every international meet there was, and basically any meet that was on the calendar in swimming I was at. And generally you have a lot of people that travel with you. You have your normal kind of group, but then you always have people that come in and out of the group. So you're always learning from different people, and maybe that person is in your circle for a year, or maybe they're in there for 3 or 4 years, but the learnings that you can get from everybody that come in and out of that environment, that high performance environment, is so vital. For my growth, it was. By the time I got to the end of 2006 as a professional athlete, I also felt like I'd got a degree in coaching. Just from the questions and the learning and the observation, and watching my peers and talking to their coaches, talking to their physiotherapists, their circle, whoever, their nutritionists, whatever it was. I just felt like I had this education and so much information and knowledge that I needed to do something with it as well. Did you feel that way?
100%. I think, like, from the basic principles, like, I had my dad as a coach for a big part of my career, and I would say that he's a generalist in the best of terms, very layman, but he has, like, a lot of ideas that he might not have the jargon or the technical terminology to ask the right questions to the right people, but
Mm.
in some way the balance between my background and his kind of like constant drive to learn and try new things, always training smarter and so forth, is, and finding common threads in the people that we have aligned ourselves with, or
Mm.
I suppose had as mentors, has been sort of key in like driving the lifelong learning. And similarly to yourself, like, when you retire, you sort of sit with all of this competence, not only
Mm.
from like the what of coaching, but like the people that you meet along the way. And this is what fascinates me mostly, is like there's some fantastic examples of wonderful leaders in our sporting organizations, even as
Mhm.
like, personal coaches or employed coaches, and to take the characteristics or the elements that we have from these coaches and apply them to, our own philosophies, or taking bits and pieces, what we can recycle and so forth, into our both work but also our own, personal coaching journeys, or, private lives. It's, I mean, you cannot undervalue the learnings that you get from being in and around high performing environments. I think it's just second to none.
Do you see a difference in the coaching environment in Sweden as opposed to, let's say, the coaching environment in Australia? Are they doing things drastically different or similar in many ways? What do you see as the commonalities there?
Hmm. Very good question. I suppose, as concise as I can be, the biggest differences are in Sweden. You have like the volunteer power of clubs, because the clubs or organizations that are hosting most of the athletes are responsible for providing first contact with swimmers or athletes, but then also using volunteer power to coach along the development pathway. And what I'm used to in Australia is to have, of course, those coaches, but they are, in, I would say, in Australia, more accredited in their knowledge. It's like, okay, maybe you can argue whether or not those accreditations are valid or up to
Mm.
date, or, but we have an accreditation system that is founded on having an expectation of like knowledge, because we're taking that to our children or our athletes, and we can do damage, but we can also do a lot of good. And the biggest difference for me in Sweden is that they hadn't, when I first got here, they didn't even have like police checks, for example. So any like person from the street could come in and say, "Hey, I want to coach," and we don't have a way to like, ensure that those coaches have, one, the knowledge or the capacity to coach, and two, the reliability or the trust to be able to
Mm.
hold a position like that. So I would say, like, in terms of professional framework, we're doing a lot better work in Australia. Um, and even looking, of course, this is my perspective. like from the start of how swimming looked in Sweden when I first got here, like some of the swimmers are having to argue for taking like a therapist or like a physical therapist or a massage therapist or a naprapat on national teams. And for me, like coming from the environment that I'm used to, that's a given. Like you are
Mm,
taking sports science, you're taking
yeah.
physiotherapists, you're taking doctors, and I felt like that they were a fair bit behind us in terms of like facilitating or helping athletes try and create the best environments for success.
Yeah, that's interesting. But you've obviously seen some growth in those areas then in the past 5 or 6 years, hey?
Absolutely. And I think that's a testament to the swimmers sort of being exposed to other environments. Like a lot of the swimmers came to Australia, they saw how, I'm talking about swimming in this case, but also with track and field, they gravitate outside the country. Some are in the US and college systems.
Mm.
Some of them came down to Australia and they were exposed to, okay, this is what maybe it should look like, and then coming home and sharing that knowledge with the federation and saying, hey, we need to be better here. Can we do something about this, and having conversations driving the development themselves from what they see outside of Sweden.
Well, it's also interesting how small the world is getting too. Even the fact that you and I are sitting here and, I'm in America, you're in Sweden right now, and we're having a very easy conversation and people can watch it, and just the simplicity of sharing knowledge and information is so much easier these days. And I think there are so many different avenues to gain information and knowledge. And it's like you said, you've got these accreditations and for whatever they're worth, that's debatable, but anybody can now access really high level conversations and education through podcasts even now, where they can just turn this on for an hour, and the learnings they can get from that and the experiences, again, like, it took me traveling around the world to have individual conversations, and now what I'm actually doing is basically doing the same thing, but I'm just hitting the record button, turning this beautiful light on in the back, and then everybody can sit in and listen to the conversation themselves now. So it's amazing how small the world has got, hey?
So true. And I think one of the things like that I found fascinating about like being in Germany, I was there for 7 years. Like my biggest learnings were done in the bar, because like we spent a lot of training camps at a place called Kienbaum, and Kienbaum is like their AIS, I suppose.
Mm,
Back in the DDR times, they had bunkers and all of that sort of funky stuff, but nowadays it's a little bit more of a mecca for coming together pre competitions or pre nationals or pre championships, and doing like a lot of your final preparations there. But it's like at the bar in the training center, which is kind of funny. Also, it's very German, like having a place where coaches can meet and drink beers and play snooker.
mm,
Like just sitting around and talking to those coaches, you have access to so much know-how.
mm. Right.
It's if I like had the ability to podcast some of the conversations I had there,
Mm,
like you know what I mean. And but the
right.
ability that we, as you say, the ability we have now to share those learnings and the knowledge that we probably wouldn't have had the opportunities had we not traveled is it's endless.
Well, you do have some studied knowledge as well that I want to tap into, not just the bar knowledge. You can add that in as well if you want. But you've done work in the area of cortisol and training stress that I'm really interested in, and I think that track and field is a little further advanced than swimming on this. Where we still, and again, I still see this so often where it's kind of this one size fits all where everybody gets in and everybody does the same workout from the age of 10 to 18 until they go off to college, and then maybe they'll split them up into groups, and even still they still do a lot of work together, but the idea of cortisol and training stress, talk to me about this. I'm very, very interested in it.
I was fortunate enough to have a strength coach, Chris Caviglio, at the time when I was at the QAS. He was very, I would say, pushy with the science, like getting behind. Okay, what can we find out more about training loads? And
Mm,
we had a collaborative effort on. Okay, how can we actually see patterns in our training? And it was born of the idea that if we can be a little bit more prescriptive in our dosage of training based on what trends we can learn about individual stress levels. And the easiest way to measure that was salivary cortisol. So I guinea pigged myself to begin with, where, or we guinea pigged myself, where we were taking like salivary cortisol levels 3 times a day, first in the morning, after the morning session, and then prior to bed, and just seeing like the fluctuations in the stress hormones, and also like monitoring the training load and the training output as well. It was, and for me, we were able to then see patterns in like, okay, when we're getting close to a championships, why are we doing more load when we can start to take it out? Because everything in terms of training, in my opinion anyway, is a hypothesis. We don't really know if it works until we get the opportunity to test it, and that's in competition. And so from that, the idea, we took that idea into a larger scale study where we were looking at, okay, what things can we enhance or reduce cortisol in athletes that are not like recovery recovery socks, massage. What sort of behaviors can we change that provide us with the most leverage based on stress? And the biggest one, or the biggest takeaway is, and a lot of people know this now, is sleep. Like that was make or break for a lot of people. And you can argue or talk about qualities of sleep, but some of our biggest findings were attached to like sleep quality, sleep length, and then like monitoring how much effect we were getting from our training. But sometimes, like, like for example, jet lag was one that really knocked people out of sync, and you have the windows that a lot of people talk about, but being a little bit more precise even then with your planning, so you know that, okay, with this cortisol reading, we can assume that we are probably not in the best state at the moment to do like a a world record or like a personal best. We might expect nothing more than our like training average, but we're probably not going to expect more than that from some competitions. And then setting up environments where we can influence. Okay, how do we reduce that stress? And I mean, there's many different ways that you can use now, but like it was just fascinating for me to be able to look behind a little bit more behind the curtains to be a little bit more prescriptive in our training programming.
Well, here's something that I've faced just recently myself. I've taken over a club program, and one of the things that I wanted to instill in them is the value of sleep. Like you said, I think it's paramount to performance, right? So what I did initially was the first month I set up a system where they would sleep in the morning and we'd do workouts every afternoon, and then Saturday morning. So they'd get 6 workouts in, just to kind of allow them to kind of adjust to the training. So give them more time to sleep in bed and relax, and then come in the afternoons and get your workouts. What I found through this process is that it didn't really matter that I was giving them the morning off per se, right? Because what they would end up doing is they'd go to school all day and they'd be working and studying and interacting, and their brain would be super active the whole day, even if they got a great night's sleep. By the time they got to me at 4:30, 5 o'clock in the afternoon, they were relatively exhausted, right? They're worn out. And so like I'm giving them these big sets thinking, hey, listen, I gave you the morning off. You've got enough energy to like really attack this. And the quality was still fairly low. So I actually introduced a morning workout a couple of weeks ago. And the first morning that they came in, we had the best workout I've ever seen them do, as a group. And I'm thinking to myself, oh, have I got this wrong? Like, am I prescribing this completely wrong? Is it better for them to wake up in the morning when they're fully rested and ready to go and produce a workout, rather than waiting the whole day, going to school, killing themselves, and then expecting great things out of them at 5 o'clock in the afternoon? I even had a girl to piggyback on this. I had a girl yesterday who we did the warm up in the afternoon. We started doing some sprints and we were getting after it, and she was really giving good effort for about 15 minutes worth of sprints. And by the time she got to the end of the 15 minutes, she just sat on the wall and she was shaking. And I was like, you okay? Like, what's wrong? Like, we hadn't done that much. I mean, we were definitely going. But she's like, yeah, and it was at that stage, it was like 6 o'clock at night. She's like, I feel really shaky. And I'm like, well, when was the last time you ate? She's like, I had lunch at 12 o'clock. I'm like, that was 6 hours ago. You ate 6 hours ago. So I'm thinking, oh my God. So yeah, I mean, this is where I'm at. I don't know. Give me some help here, man.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think typically what we know, or what patterns we saw a lot of, is like, we know that testosterone or cortisol is at its lowest first thing in the morning. So if I'm a power athlete, like I'm hitting the gym when my T is as high as possible, and so, or we would have like sessions that are of high RPE or high effort in the morning rather than in the afternoon. And of course, there is all, it's not an absolute science. This is the thing, and one of the things that we have to come back to is you can still feel rubbish and do a great performance, because sometimes you have to do that. But there are other factors that are at play, adrenaline and all those sorts of things, and
Yeah.
luck of the game, and you know being in the right place at the right time. But typically, like, when we are when first thing in the morning is when we want to hit like harder sessions. And for me, that was even moving some of the athletes that I was working with training times from 10 o'clock, which is like very track and field, like we start at 10
Right.
and then we come back again at 3, and adapt to more of a swimming approach where it's like, okay, we are ready to go at 8 in the morning. And it makes sense, because like most of the qualifying rounds at championships are first thing in the morning,
Mm,
irrespective of what sport you're doing. So that's kind of like setting you up for, quality anyway, because you're practicing what you're going to have to do at a championship, at least to make it to a semi or a final, which are most predominantly in the evenings. But that's a big finding, and some people need the proof, and they need to look at the hormones to see and believe that. But then, of course, like, again, this is my perspective, but most of the athletes that I work with, like, we are working more along the lines of like trying to keep blood sugar at a consistent level throughout the day, and that is like eating very often. And I mean, I still hold that principle now in my day to day, but for the athletes that I work with, we talk about, okay, I mean, if you've got a session at 4 in the afternoon, you should have eaten 30 minutes prior, and you should be eating 30 minutes after, and there's no excuses for that. That's easy to manage. But there's still, I mean, I've seen some Aussies like having Milo and white bread for breakfast, and then going and trying to smash off 10 Ks in the pool, and you're like, how do you even survive? Like,
mm,
so I mean, there are still there there are people who are giving things a good try, and doing the best with the knowledge they have, but you don't have to look too far. And I think this is what one of the benefits is of like looking across different sports and taking bits and pieces of concepts from different sports, how they do things, and maybe adopting them into the way we think, or the way we approach our training. And for me, swimming is a fantastic case of like accountability, because we're very individualized in track and field. We do a lot of things in our event groups, but there's a little bit more of a, everyone in the pool at the same time, and you have a bit more of a culture of like
right.
togetherness, pushing each other, which we miss a lot in track and field. You really have to work hard to create those kind of environments.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess from your kind of assessment there, it may be better for me to kind of add in a couple of more workouts a week in the morning rather than trying to get the best out of them in the afternoon at 5 o'clock at night. Then,
Yeah, because then you have, like, if they're at school as well, then you have, I mean, study is a stress.
hey.
Um, Learning is a stress. Relationships are a stress.
Right.
There are a lot of stresses in our lives, and trying to manage that to be able to perform is a fine balance. And as a coach, like, of course, you can have enough trust with your athletes where they can talk to you about what kind of stress they have in their lives at any one moment. But you're trying to navigate the best possible scenario based on lifestyle, based on study, based on jobs, based on their whole life. And you can only go with as much information as that you both have access to. But also, like, thinking about Like we moved from a typical 7-day training cycle, fluctuating throughout the year with like 3-day training, like 3-day rollover, 5-day rollover, 10-day rollover, where it was like, for example, we would have like high, low, medium principle. And that's something that I use a lot still today. It's like, okay, high is where we go hard. That's, we're right up there. And we have some people, we used to call it bash park, but it's like a lot of things at max, because we want to see or observe what kind of movements or what effects we are having at max. And then the next session will be low. So, you're down around lower intensity, but you're able to do more or longer workouts. And then a medium is a balance of like, let's say, for example, mixed intensities. You might hit max a little bit, but then you might be just under max. But testing how you look, or depending on what that looks like, if it's the weight room or it's the pool, you have the whole idea of like trying to mix intensities. And in the medium, like we would even, like for some of the throwers that I work with, for example, we play the dice game where, let's say, for example, you roll 2 dice, and if the number was like 65 and you're throwing the discus, we try and hit 65. But then the next roll you have is like 32. So then you've got to try and throw 32 meters with the same technique. So it's kind of like a force parameter where you have to control your intensity, but still have proficient movement patterns whilst you're doing that. So, and we rolled that over like, 3-day rollover. It's like high, low, medium, high, low, medium, high, low, medium, instead of thinking, okay, I've got Monday to Sunday to get as much work done as possible. So we just roll it over like that, or 5 even, and 10, putting in rests in between that, depending on the training age of the athlete.
What do you mean by 5 and 10? What does that mean?
So let's say I'll take a discus thrower, for example, because it's something that I know in particular. In a 5-day rollover, instead of like thinking, okay, 7 days in the week, Monday to Sunday, I want to go like high, low, medium within those 5 days, but I also need to allow for rest. And so for an older athlete that are, towards the 30s, a little bit older, we might be allowing like 72 hours or 48 hours between high and the next low session. But you can do a lot of other stuff that are of low amplitude, but you don't want to be like pushing them too hard. So instead of like keeping it within that 3-day window, you push it out to 5 and allow for more rest. Or you might put in like rehabilitation or general training or dry land or whatever it might be, that doesn't take too much away from the actual skill itself or the swimming itself. So, and then again, you can push that out into 10 days. We typically do that in competition season. So then you're having like a high, low, medium, but you're stretching it out in a 10-day cycle, and you might put in a few more lifts within that, or you might be traveling within that to competitions and changing time zones and so on. So that's very, very short or summarized version of what it could look like. But
yeah, it's interesting, and I like all these, different formulas and different ways to do it. I guess that, and your wife could attest to this, is like, it's kind of like you said, like we have these set patterns and routines in swimming that are just ingrained in us, right? Like you got to do, it's the typical kind of 9 to 10 sessions a week, right? Like you double Monday, single Tuesday, double Wednesday, single, double, single, and you kind of go off that, or there's variations of that. But generally, most athletes in swimming are saying, hey, I've got to be doing something twice a day. And I've got to be doing it for at least an hour and a half to 2 hours, like it's just in their head. And it's like, the idea with my group of giving them the morning off was to say, hey, I want to give you extra rest. I want to give you extra sleep so that we then can come to this workout 24 hours later and have another great workout, rather than beat you down and you're giving me 65, 70% every time we jump in the water. I want to try and get that to 90, 95, 100%. I want to see how close we can get to your max every 24 hours, let's say. And even that concept you would never approach it like that in track and field, but even for swimming, like 24 hours rest is a long time to say come back and go again. So but it's really difficult, because then they think to themselves, well, I got the morning off, I can stay up late, I can play video games, I can hang out with my friends, I can get on TikTok, I can eat whenever I want to, or not, or it's just like they throws out the whole ecosystem. You know what I mean? So you think you're getting one thing, you want it to be this way, but they don't know how to adapt to it. So it's you're not getting what you want in the end.
Well, and also, like, rest is uncomfortable because all of a sudden you've got time,
Right.
and you hear that so often. Even, I hear it often, and it becomes more apparent for me because I'm not a swimmer. But like, I need to feel the water. I need to have the feeling. Like, you hear this a lot. Like, but do you need to swim 7 or 10K to get feeling? Like, can you do, like, 500 meters to a K and still maintain that feeling? You could do that after a gym session, or you could do that in the morning just as a shakeout and then go home. Like, and that's still, like, considered rest compared to what your normal training load would be, if that is what you need to feel. But you probably have that less, I would say, in track and field. I don't know this for sure, but at least in throwing and sprinting, like, you got to rev that engine pretty hard, and to get to max, you got to spend 45 minutes warming up.
Right.
Most of the time. So, whereas you may or may not have that same requirement when you don't have 13 times your body weight to worry about in the pool or in the water.
Yeah. Yeah, there's definitely those aspects, and I think those are part of the reasons why swimmers can back up quicker. I still value rest, though. Like, I still think that I still see swimmers dragging themselves into the pool every day and, like, not anywhere near 100% ready to go again, and they're kind of just bashing a dull nail, like on the head. It's just like constantly bashing a dull nail. It's like, so you can get something out of it, but you're not going to get the effectiveness that I think you could get out of it. But yeah, I don't
I've got a question for you there. Do you think that's a cultural thing? Like, because, like, if you're used to, like, kilometers, or used to measuring meters, or you're used to feeling, like, tired after sessions, is that hard to leave that headspace and then come to, like, a program that might be completely the opposite?
Right. Yeah, I think so. And then not only are you dealing with it yourself mentally, of like what you've left behind or whatever, but then everyone from the outside is telling you that's wrong. You can't do it that way. And so, like, they're just getting this noise. So it's almost like getting on social media and just getting bombarded with noise, and it's the same thing. It's like when you're trying something different that's outside the realm of what everybody's doing, everybody's going to tell you you're wrong and it's not the right way to do it. So we need these outliers. We need people like, Sarah, let's say, to say, hey, I've shifted my training, I'm doing things differently, I'm getting results. And so then people start to take notice of those types of people who are like, hang on a second, Sarah's over 30 now, she's still winning Olympic titles, like, she's swimming faster than ever, she's made some shifts in her training, like why can't we do that? Why, so it's like you need those Cam McAvoys, those people that are getting these incredible results from different training modalities and doing it differently. But again, I think that I think it's difficult, and it takes a team of people to believe in that, and who believe in that, and you've got to be steadfast in that as well. And that's where I do believe in rest and recovery. Look, there's two major things that have happened in my life, in my career as a swimmer. One of them was overtraining syndrome. Like, I experienced that myself. I was in a program that was doing yards and miles and miles and miles and training for the 100 freestyle to be able to finish my 100, right? Like this was the, you got to finish your 100. So you got to put in miles to do that, right? And I just buried myself. And I had a situation before the 96 Olympic trials. This was a couple of months out where I was bedridden. I'm talking about bedridden. Like I was so beat down. My cortisol is just off the charts. It was just, I was done about 2 months out of the Olympic trials. And so I went on this kind of like a naturopathic line where I was taking, echinacea and things like this, just some natural type herbs, but just rest, sleep, like for a couple of weeks on end where I just didn't get out of bed, and came back about a month out of Olympic trials, and all I did was swim easy. I couldn't go fast. I couldn't hit that top speed or anything. So my heart rate would just skyrocket as soon as I did anything. So I would just float. I would just float. Anyway, long story short, I get to the trials a couple of months later and swim my best times and miss the Olympic team by a couple of hundredths of a second. And I thought to myself, I've done nothing over the last 2 months other than just recover. So that was my first light bulb moment when I was just a kid. I was 20 years old at the time. And then you have situations where you see the best athletes in the world. Like I was reading about one of the best female athletes in the world today, where she said she pulled out of the world championships, which are in December, because she needs time. I'm thinking of, and that's so common. This is not a knock on her in any way, but it's like what we do in swimming is we grind so hard that at the end of just one major competition, we need 3 or 4, 5, 6 months off because we've just gone so hard in the paint. Imagine saying that to an NFL player or an NBA player or even a Major League Baseball player. Major League Baseball, they play like 4 games a week for 50 weeks a year. Basically, it's like, yes, they're getting paid millions of dollars to do it, but they have this rotation in Major League Baseball. You come in and then you rest, and you come in, you rest, and it's like this rest rotation. And so, like in swimming, we grind so hard that we need 6 months off after a major competition. And it doesn't make sense to me. I'm like, why can't we do less, enjoy the process more, and go and travel and do all these competitions and take less time off because we're actually getting more recovery time in between? You know what I'm saying? Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, and then you've got the hunger element. I
Right.
wonder. I mean, it's so true. I agree with what you're saying. I think like one of the light bulb moments for us was, of course, you do the hard work until you can't do it any longer, and then you wonder, you're faced with the question of like, what can I tolerate? And do I want to keep going? And like for me, that was in 2009, and I sat down with my coach at the time, Jurgen, and my dad, and we started to write down, okay, what are the questions that we need to answer? And the first one was like, are we making ourselves tired, or are we making ourselves better? And for us, it was like we're making ourselves tired way more than we're making ourselves better. We're doing the load because we know no other way. And so, like, even to give you like an example of how that would manifest in training, like if I'm doing snatch in the gym or clean, normally I'd do like 5 sets of 6, but there's nothing to say that I can't do like 12 sets of 2 and have longer rest in between. I just driving the quality up, and I'm not flogging the absolute bananas. I've already got
Right.
a base level of strength. I just need to keep revving the engine,
Right.
because I'm probably going to get maybe 1, 2, 3% stronger. But if I can improve my technique and be healthy and not like cooked, then
Right.
the likelihood of being able to compete well when it matters becomes greater. And for me, that was always like a hypothesis. You never really knew, and I was on the bubble of injury all the time. Sometimes I tipped over, more often than not, but it wasn't for the sake of like actually having to ask those better questions. And the philosophy that we went into the later stages of my career were like, we should never be more than 2 weeks away from like a good performance. If we are, we're too deep in
Yeah.
the training. and
Yes.
and so like these kinds of learnings I use even for the youngsters. And I
Mm.
wonder in swimming, like, because you start so young, you're met with carrot and stick motivation a lot of the time. Like, that's at least what I hear or saw a lot of um, around the pools is like, of course, sometimes you need carrot and stick, but then you get to the point where you are mature enough, you've been through puberty, like you've done the competitions, you've been to championships and had the failures. You get to own your why a little bit more.
Mm.
And I wonder if changing the way we look at motivation, because when you see what the likes of Cam and even Sarah and other swimmers have done, is that for me it's been more of a taking over the why again and finding what motivates them to keep going and keep wanting to, because they don't need to really,
Yeah. Mm.
but when they have a stronger sense of why, then they get to make choices. you know they get to do things that they think are interesting, or they want to create their own hypothesis and try things out. And then you see people either fly or they don't. But it's always lovely to see people like pushing the buck and getting the results. Absolutely.
Yeah, look, it just I'm glad you reached out to me. The day that we had a chat off camera, it was a great conversation. I think again, those things need to happen. I think what you are doing and what I'm doing and what the stage I guess we're both at is we're looking at things and thinking like, look, it's not necessarily wrong, but how can we do it better? And that's what I look at when I see a situation like this swimmer or swimmers who have just come off the Paris Olympics, and they're saying to themselves and their coaches and their fans or whoever, hey, I need 6 months off. Like, to me, that's a problem. And it's like swimming it can't just be a once every 4 year kind of coming out party and celebration, and then we go off and hibernate and disappear again, for a period of time. Like, our stars have to be active, and they have to be out at the forefront, and it can't be a situation where we just end up repeating these cycles like Phelps, right? Or for instance, people like that, our superstars who say, hey, I went through this process and it was so hard on me that now I have depression. Now I have issues where I can't go out and face the world or whatever it is. And you hear Phelps talk about this, but it's very common in our sport, where again, where our athletes are just being pushed and challenged and driven into the ground, that they come out the back end of things like this, and they just need to breathe, and they just want to collapse. So again, I think of it of like, okay, how can we change this? It can't
Mm,
it can't just be a repetitive cycle. You know what I mean?
And I think one of the beauties of being outside the system is that you can ask those questions and look through the window and make observations, and you know have a perspective that may not be in line with what needs to be said. And that for me, that's a fantastic place to be in, because like there are a lot of people who are doing work outside the system and having great success, and they don't need to be in or outside the system either. But I find that, like, being able to attach yourself, or sit in a room and have conversations with people who don't agree with you, or who challenge the way that you think, and you doing this now and going out there to the community, and bringing this podcast to people where you can ask perhaps a better question, and maybe get another answer, can
Mm.
inspire someone to go, "Shit, that's worth trying out."
Yeah, yeah.
So
Well, you're
that's
going against the grain, and you're subject to putting yourself so far out there that you're going to get criticism, right? And you're going to have doubters, and you're going to have haters. And so this is where I find myself right now. I'm putting myself so far out there that certainly I'm getting people like you reach out and say, Brett, I really like what you're on to here. I like the way that you're thinking, and let's have a discussion around that. That's good. Like, and then those people are there, and they've been in the shadows, honestly, which is why I love this conversation that we're recording, and we get to put it out, because there are people like you outside the sport who are like, Brett, you are doing good things and asking the right questions, and I like that. But I'm getting a lot of the opposite of like shut up, Brett, you don't know what you're talking about. You did this in the past, it's not the way it is, blah, 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 or it's just for this person, or it's just for that. They kind of box it in. They want to minimize it. They want to say it's not, so they're fighting this old regime of like, this is how we do things. This is the way it's done. This is the way we have success. Yes, you do have success that way, but we've got to start looking at it to find better ways. And when you hear the Cam McAvoys come out and say, I found a better way for me, it works, like, it's okay to then explore that. Again, it's not saying that one way is better than the other. It's just we've got to start to explore a different way if we want to shift and evolve our sport into the future, because you can't just keep doing the same things and expect a different result.
100%. And I think, like, for me, you have to look at the intention. Like, when I listened to, your podcast previous to reaching out to you, I understood that your intention was not to do harm. It was just to, like, dig a little bit deeper under the surface and see what you could find. And for me, I tend to gravitate more towards those people, because then you're getting somewhere, or you don't, but at least you're brave enough to ask those questions. And I never had the impression that the questions that you're asking, or having an opinion about what X or Y does in their program, was with the intent to make a mockery of them. It was just to let's have a conversation about whether it's right for everyone or not.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Well, I see things that are negative in the positive, right? Like when you have a situation where one of the best athletes in the world needs 6 months off after a major competition, and again, this is very, very common. It's not one person, very common. I think to myself, okay, that's great. You got that result, and maybe you won multiple gold medals, and maybe you beat everybody in the world, just sacrificing everything in your life to get that one result. But now look at the end result of that, where you have to now disappear or take some time, or you're in a state of depression, or you're saying to the world, like, I need space away from this. Like, how can it be that heavy on anybody to get a result like that, where you need time away from it in the peak of your life, right? Like, again, imagine if LeBron went through a season, won a championship, or anyone in basketball. I use LeBron because he's known, right? Like, let's just say LeBron James goes through and wins a championship, and then says, "Hey, I'm going to take next season off because that was too grueling for me." It just wouldn't happen. And so that's where I'm at with swimming. I'm like, why are we still in this spot where it's like we have to do these things to get this ultimate result? Like, it's so costly to me. It costs so much in terms of the time and energy and effort you put into it, that there has to be a different way. And then Cam McAvoy comes along and says, yeah, there is a different way. Look, I did it. And you're like, oh, thank God. Like, like, what can we learn from that? And it doesn't mean everybody has to do that and do it the way Cam did it, but there's got to be learnings from it that we can take from it. And for me, I hear a lot too now where they say, I see that now, and I get that, but I'm too afraid to make any changes. Like, I'm just too scared. It's too easy for me to do this. It's just been the way I've done it for 20, 30 years. I'm just going to keep doing it, because I'm just too afraid. I like that, but I'm just too afraid, so.
And unfortunately, it's often attached to a funding model. Like, you are a part of a program, and you get paid to be a part of a program, and you step outside that program, and all of a sudden you're out flying in the wind on your own with no investment. Right. And for some people, that's a difficult decision, to go from, like, earning minimum wage to nothing, and then trying to swim full time, or trying to do any sport full time. But, like, for me, I'd love to get to a place where, you know, load, or the amount of work you do, is no longer a glamorous conversation. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Like, it's a badge of honor.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, we work so hard that, yeah, well, everyone works really hard.
Right.
And this comes again from a lot of my dad's philosophy, is like, why are we working backwards from 24 hours in the day? We should be working backwards from 0 hours in the day. Because if we can spend training 1 minute and have success, we're doing the right things. Like,
Right.
not the other way around. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
very, very generalist thinking, but,
Mm.
there's a lot to learn from that, and I think, like, part of my programming, or at least prescription of training now, comes from that principle. It's like, what can we take out of here? Rather than what do we need to keep adding on? And of course, again, you know, sometimes, of course, you need to work. We all know that. But I don't necessarily think everyone needs to. It's not the amount of work that we do that makes us great. It's the quality as well of what we're doing in the work, and to be brave enough to try things at the right time in your
Mm.
career to keep motivation strong, but also to, like, it's worth it. If you're getting the same results time and time again, you're always fourth, you're always fifth, and okay, maybe we need to just change something a little bit up here, and boom, you might get a breakthrough, but again, you might not. But what have you lost?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, what have you lost? You learned something,
That's
so
that's right.
yeah. Who are some of the other people in this space, maybe like in track and field or in swimming, that you've seen that you see are kind of pushing the conversation this way? Do you have other people you could reference?
Absolutely. I think in swimming, I had many great conversations with Shannon Rollinson.
Mm,
Again, he is a guy who thought or took a lot of track and field concepts into his training at the time that we were speaking. Um, and I attach myself to people who tend to be like lifelong learners, like, always wanting to find new information. And we
yep.
could sit down and have a conversation like we were just two bare bums in the shower. Like, of course, he's produced all the athletes that he has, and that's to be respected. But he gave his time to me to talk about training principles and so forth. And then, of course, he got Bolly and these individuals in the swimming space. But then for me in track and field, like Dan Paff is a big mentor. Another guy who's an older gentleman, but constantly pushing knowledge and sharing knowledge so liberally with people, anyone who asks for it. And then my German coach Jürgen, who was part of the DDR system. And for me, going into, or I literally sent him an email and said, "Hey man, I'm from Australia. You're my idol. I'd like to train with you. Is that possible?" And I went from like that email, not expecting a response, to living in Germany for 7 years, training with him and him mentoring my dad.
Mm,
And like, when you are like, it took us a little bit of time to develop trust, him and
yeah.
I, because he didn't know me from a bar of soap, and I had him pegged as my idol based on his career as an athlete.
Mm,
But then when I got to see like a person who has lived through the DDR and experienced what he has experienced in East Germany,
mm,
to have a coaching philosophy that was completely the opposite, um, it was fascinating, because to turn what he's probably learnt his whole career on its head and go, I don't want to coach anyone to do what I did, because it was like
mm,
cruel and horrible and whatever. Of course, he's grateful for it, but we were on a training camp, and this story isn't a, for me, epitomizes him as a coach. It's like 2.5 years in, we're at a training camp in Keenbum, that was place I was telling you about, and I'd been having a fairly good season. I think I'd won Commonwealth Games. I came back and I had one competition left, and we had like a 3-week training camp in Keenbum, and it's literally in the middle of nowhere. It's on a farm away from everything. Like, it's an hour to Berlin, an hour to anything,
mm,
civilization, really. So you're there to
mm.
train and do nothing else.
Right.
Anyway, so it's like you and me, we're rooming together, and I'm like, cool. Of course, we got along really well, and at this time he smoked, and so for 3 weeks, he was just a prick to me, like smoking in the room, coming home late at 2 in the morning, keeping me up,
Mm,
and like my second last session before going away to this championships, I had the best training session of my life. Um, and afterwards, he sat down and he talked to me. He's like, it's taken me like the best part of 3 weeks to get you to this point. Like, I'm having to push your buttons outside of training, like irritating you because you were complacent, like you were happy with your performance, and I knew that I could get more out of you, but I just needed to bring you to another level, and you had to get frustrated in order to get there. And I was just like, afterwards I was like gobsmacked. I was like, how can you make that call knowing that it would work? You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
that's some serious like trust. And
Mm.
I mean, these lessons are worth so much. I probably wouldn't do it to my
Yeah.
my own athletes, but
Yeah. Yeah.
you know, like the response that it got out of me, knowing that for me, I'm quite an accepting person and soft in nature, that
Yeah.
I needed that to get there. Otherwise, I
Mm.
might not have ever pushed myself. I would have been happy with, you know, winning Commonwealth Games and then, you know, not going on to World Cup afterwards and doing well. But I was just like, for me, that's leadership in a nutshell, but also adaptation, like knowing when to bring out the guns and when to push and when to pull at the right moment.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And that is coaching. You know, I think, yeah, like you said, that way of doing it, you probably couldn't get away with that in America. Certainly in Germany, maybe. But the concept, for those that don't understand high performance, that would seem like really outside the lines, right? But you know, the idea of it is what he's trying to do. He's trying to get under your skin. He's trying to get something out of you that he knows is there, but you haven't tapped into yet, you know? And when it finally clicks, then he's like, yes, there it is. You know, that's what was in you. And I was trying to get that out. And it's hard. Like, you got to dig sometimes. You got to find different ways to get that out of them, because maybe they're just sitting in a space where they're comfortable and they just think this. But the comfort to them is, it's uncomfortable enough for them to think like, oh no, I'm at my limit. But the great coaches are like, no, there's more in you. I can see more, and I gotta mine it. I gotta dig it. I gotta dig it, and I gotta get to it. And then once you hit that jackpot, you're like, bam. And then it's like this wake up call for the athlete too. It's like, yeah, I actually had a couple of moments like that I can go back to. You know, like, I've told this story many times where Fred Bousquet was the first man under 21 seconds in the 50 freestyle, and I went out to France to watch him, and I'd left my team behind, and he was warming up for the event, and he was looking good, but he was complaining the whole time, you know, and it was one of those situations again where I was like, Fred's in a space where there's a performance in him, but I don't know how to get it out of him right now. I've got to get it out of him. I've got to get it out of him. And so eventually I just lost it with him in the warm up pool and said, I'm so sick of your BS. I'm leaving. Warm yourself up, type of thing. And it just kind of shocked him, you know. And then the next time I see him, 30 minutes later, he goes out and breaks the world record and was like, I needed that wake up call in warm up. I'm like, yeah, I know you did. So it's like, when you can find those moments, where you just stop holding their hand, for that 1 second, in time, and they have to figure it out. Then there's this turnaround, and that's what your coach got out of you. It's beautiful coaching, but it's difficult for sure.
And the underlying factor, I think, here in both of these like learnings is that there is trust. Like,
Yeah.
you couldn't do that if
Right.
you didn't feel as though you trusted your coach. And
Right.
like, to get to that point was, 3 years of relationship. Like,
Yeah.
if I was there 5 minutes in, of course I would be like, this guy's a nutter, get me out of here.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I believed in what our chemistry. I believed in the program, and I believed in the process.
Yeah.
But this was an extreme case where I didn't know at the time what he was doing. So,
Yeah.
it got the response that was desired. And similarly for you, it's like, it's a risk always, but
Mm.
sometimes you got to make those calls. And when they work, you're like, holy shit. But pulling them out at the right time is I think what's key.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. You gotta know when to pull that trigger, and it's difficult. And yeah, for sure. I mean, I probably had a couple of moments where I was like, that was not the right time. That was the wrong time. You gotta be careful with those. But yeah, when you can get it, it's good coaching. So yeah, trust is a huge thing in coaching. But man, I think we could go on forever with this conversation. There's a lot of good stuff here, and I think we could come back to it again. But I hope this conversation has, number one, I hope it's encouraged people that are listening to this to continue just to ask questions. I don't have all the answers. If anyone thinks that I have all the answers in sprinting, in swimming, you're not right. I don't have all the answers. I'm on an exploration to find them. I've discovered some things. I've found ways that have worked really well, and I'm continuing to kind of mine those areas and figure them out. That's just why I'm having a conversation with a 3-time Olympic discus thrower right now. So it's like, I continue to dig and dig. I certainly am putting out my learnings and putting them out to say, hey, these are things that I feel like are working that are different for sure. But we got to continue to grow and figure this out. That's the only way we get faster. In swimming, it's a time thing. The clock at the end tells you exactly how fast you've gone, and we can't just be satisfied seeing the same time over and over again. We have to push human capabilities, and we have to figure out how to continue to get further. And for me, the way I'm doing that is through recovery right now. It's not that badge of honor that we talked about where it said who's the hardest worker in the room. That's not how I think we're going to get faster in the future. What I think it's going to take is someone who says, hey, I've rested and recovered enough to be able to come back and do it again. And then I've taken that rest and I've gone again, and then I've come back again. And this is how I'm getting faster, through recovery. So yeah, that's kind of my final message on that.
Fantastic. And I think, like, for me, on just on that note, Brett, like, I resented the system when I was active because I was not supported. Like, a lot
Mm.
of the things that I did were funded by my parents or myself.
Right.
And one of the things, the behaviors that I had based on that resentment was that I kept the learnings for myself.
Mm.
And one of the reasons why I started, Herradine Performance and coaching more is that I realized that just because I've invested in my learning doesn't mean that I can't share it.
Right.
And I was letting other people determine whether or not I could share my information. And what you're doing here is exponential learning, because you're testing things out, you're asking questions, but then you're taking it to the people and letting
Yeah.
them decide for themselves. And this is what we want. Like, I
Mm.
think that one of the reasons why we're seeing more and more success, and like times and times getting faster and faster and performances getting better and better, is because coaches are sharing their information,
Yeah.
knowing that there is no magic wand. And
Right.
like, had I, that learning for me, like, the resentment shouldn't be, rationale for me keeping this information to myself. Like, share it with whoever wants it. And I think more power to you. Like, doing this is giving people the opportunity to have access to quality, and having access to good questions, and listening to people that they might find interesting, or they might find less interesting, but yeah, at least you're
Right.
getting it out there.
Yeah, mate. Look, I liken things to things that make sense to me. Like if I take a piece of meat, it's a steak, right? And a steak is a steak is a steak. But there are 20 different ways that you can cook that steak. There's so many. You might take that steak to one person, they say, I'm going to cook it this way. You take that same piece of meat, and they're going to say, I'm going to take it this way, and it's still going to be a steak. It might taste slightly different, right? But that's the way we do it. And so my way of cooking my steak is going to be a little bit different than down here. And the person that eats my steak might say, it's not to my liking. I kind of like it that way. And someone else might say that's the best steak I've ever eaten. So like that's just it's the way it's going to go. So I hope that makes sense to people, and we continue to share ideas, and don't be so closed-minded that we think there's only one way because it's worked in the past for Michael Phelps and that's the way that everyone's got to do it. No, there's other ways we can do it. So, mate, Ben, I
100%.
appreciate this today, mate. Where can people find you if they want to reach out to you?
I actually got off social media most recently, so the easiest way is just via my homepage, harradineperformance.com,
Okay, cool.
or direct email, ben@harradineperformance.com with two N's.
Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't been in and around the
Awesome.
social space. It's been great.
Yeah. It's good. Yeah. I
Of
like
course,
it.
X. I use X, but that's the only thing.
Oh, that's the worst one. If you're going to pick any of them, get rid of X. X.
No, I
X
like it.
does my head in. I can't. I walk into X. I spend 3 minutes in there, and I walk out. I'm like, I can't take this place. But yeah, I get it. All right, whatever works. But appreciate it, mate. Thanks for the convo today.
Thanks so much, Brett.
All right, later.
Catch up.
You want to swim faster? You need Sprint Revolution resistance equipment. This isn't just gear, it's a game changer. Our propellers, power socks, stretch cords, parachutes, and paddles are all designed to build explosive speed and power in the water. If you're serious about taking your swim to the next level, you need the best resistance gear out there. Sprint Revolution, where speed is born.